I recently made some big changes in my listening space and I'm looking to replace my KEF LS50 speakers. I got KEF R3 Meta and ProAc D2 to compare with the KEFs. How do they compare? There's nothing wrong with the LS50 really, it's an amazing speaker for the money. I just wanted to try something new. I'm not a professional reviewer with a lot of experience, so this is just my real world example. How do I find these speakers in my own home, my own listening space? I think the only way to really know if the speakers work for you is to have them at home for quite a long time. So I bought these both second hand and I've had them for a month now, and it's time to decide which one do I keep. I've had few pair of speakers in the last 10 to 15 years, but I never really had a proper stereo setup until this LS50 setup I've had now for around 3 to 4 years. Before that it's been just mostly desktop setups because I've been living in student flats and other small apartments. I've been to hi-fi shows, listened to a range of different setups from basic to something very expensive, but it's always very different experience. Like the rooms are different to your own room. The music is usually something you don't listen to, so it's not quite the same as actually trying the speakers at home. I'm not a golden ear guy. I don't hear a lot of the small nuances a lot of people say that they can hear. The overall balance needs to be good enough. I have a small room, so the room response will look like a roller coaster anyway, so I'm not too worried about small dips or bumps in the frequency response of speakers. One thing that's really important to me is the soundstage and stereo image. And the stereo image, especially in the small room like I have, it's very sensitive to speaker placement. Moving yourself on the speakers even just a little bit can make a huge difference in the stereo image. Okay, let's go to the point and let's start with the LS50 versus R3 Meta. Both have good balance, they are similar obviously. The soundstage is solid, accurate. I don't think it's the most three-dimensional. In some ways I even found that the LS50 soundstage is maybe a tiny bit better at times than the R3, while the R3 has something I've seen described as microdynamics, and in terms of like mid-range vocals, human voice, the R3 in some ways it sounds a bit more refined, kind of a little bit nicer. Obviously bass response is one of the big differences probably between these speakers because the R3 is a three-way. Unfortunately my room has a huge dip around 50 to 60 Hz, so it doesn't sound too different in my space. I think there's something in the LS50 soundstage I prefer, and something in the mid-range refinement in the R3 Meta. The best fit probably would be the LS50 Meta with the subwoofer. Just a word on the finish. Both speakers have very distinct look. I don't like the gloss finish, which unfortunately a lot of speakers are these days, this LS50 as well, because I have TV in the same space, so I can see reflections if the position of the speaker is like that. The R3, I mean overall I like the look of the speaker, but the walnut finish it looks a bit unnatural, plasticky. It's not the best veneer finish. And just a word on my listening space. I'm lucky enough to have a dedicated listening space, but it's a small room. It's very narrow. The length is kind of alright. It's like 4.5 meters, I think. But the width is less than 3 meters, and that's causing some issues. Especially I have this bad deep around 50, 60, 70 Hz. No matter what I do, I just cannot get rid of them. Especially, always need to position the speakers in a way that you can get the sound stage, what I'm after, and then I just cannot get the bass response. So actually in the middle of all this review, I realized this bass problem. This is a new room, so I wasn't completely aware of it before, but so I got myself a small subwoofer, SVS 3000 micro. I never really wanted to have subwoofer for music, and to be honest, if I knew that when I started looking for these speakers on eBay, I probably would have picked something else anyway, something maybe even smaller, closed, sealed box. Okay, something a bit different. ProAc Response D2. The ProAc is a little bit more expensive speaker than the KEF R3 Meta, but the cost structure is a bit different because the ProAcs are made in England, so I would consider them, they are in the same category. I actually wanted to get the D2R, the ribbon version. I heard it in a hi-fi show. For 6 months there was not a single D2 speaker on eBay, and when this one came about I just decided to buy it even if it wasn't the ribbon version. Of course, then 2 weeks after I got this one there was one ribbon version, but the sound is different. The balance is, it's a bit brighter, at least in my space, but again what I pay attention is the soundstage, and it's more lively. When the KEF is kind of well defined between the speakers, it's very kind of accurate, you can pinpoint the instruments. This ProAc, I feel that it goes more beyond the speakers, that especially the depth of the soundstage, so it's kind of more three-dimensional, in some ways more entertaining. On the negative side, it lacks some of the refinement the KEF has. I know I'm an engineer audiophile, and I know that the KEF is a better engineered speaker. It measures well, and even if I don't know exactly how that should sound like, when you listen to it, you can kind of imagine that it is a better engineered speaker than the ProAc is. But at the same time, there's just something more fun with the ProAcs. So if we go back to the KEF again, the soundstage is somehow better defined, even if it's not as three-dimensional, big, quite wide. I feel that it's kind of like between the speakers, in the plane of the speakers. There's something that it's more refined. Maybe it's a bit more polite. I don't know if it's because I don't find it as bright. Maybe this politeness sometimes maybe a bit more boring. I mentioned that I needed to get this subwoofer in the middle of all this testing, and for some reason I find that it was easier to integrate the sub with the KEFs than with the ProAcs. And a word on the cabinet finish again. So if you compare, they're both walnut veneer. So the ProAc is what I call like a nice natural finish. A few words on the electronics used with the speakers. So right now I'm using Veeam Ultra Streamer preamp and a Neurochrome power amplifier. I had my own DAC between these two, but when I need to get the subwoofer, it's just a lot easier now just to use the Veeam. I will see what's gonna be the final setup, but that's what I have now. Okay, so what are the conclusions? I've been listening to these for about a month now, mostly swapping between the R3 Meta and the D2. Every now and then a bit of the LS50 as well. And one thing I can say, it's difficult. It's very difficult to pick. First I prefer the ProAcs, then I prefer the R3 Meta, then the ProAcs again. And when filming this, I've put the KEFs on eBay already, but also when preparing for this video, I just listened through all the three speakers still once again, and I started getting second thoughts already that did I make the right choice, so it's difficult. Of course, part of me is also thinking now that I should have tried the LS50 Meta. So the decision for now is to keep the ProAcs, but I don't think that's going to, I mean, I know that it's not going to be the last thing. Of course, if we take price into account, the LS50 is the clear winner here. So there's no doubt about that. It's not available new anymore, but you have plenty of second-hand. So the bottom line was that I just found the ProAcs a little bit more entertaining, fun to listen to in some ways, even if KEFs were some way a safe choice. They work fairly well for all sorts of music. It's quite difficult to explain the differences. It's a bit like I like my beers and whiskey as well, and when you share your tasting notes of whiskey, for example, you just have all these weird adjectives and they may mean completely different things to other people, and of course all this is just my personal preferences, my ears, my room. Your miles will vary. You can only get so much from reading or listening to reviews. You actually need to experience it yourself. I think I will be listening to music for a while now instead of listening to speakers. We should always remember that. Why do we have the speakers? But whenever I have something new to trial, I will post a video about it. So catch you next time.